My name is Simone Littledale Escobar, and this is my first solo show. It's called Buena, Mujer, and it's basically just an exploration of my identity. I'm half Colombian, half Canadian, and so I wanted to explore a concept that encompasses the Colombian side of my heritage, which is my mom's side, and it's a really strong cultural influence in my life. And the women in my family in particular have always been a really strong influence. My family is sort of marked by really powerful, creative women, and it's partially, this show is really dedicated to them and their resilience and their beauty and their strength and how they've inspired me throughout my life. So the main theme of the show is around womanhood and devotion and mental illness in how it's dealt with in Latin American family culture, because even in my family, it was something that was not necessarily talked about really openly. My mom was the first one to really say, okay, this is a thing that I struggle with. And she was really open about it with me and my brother, and she wanted us to be able to speak openly about it. But she grew up in a family that, you know, where the terminologies used were not, like, they didn't describe her experience. And talking to friends and family members when I go to South America, it's really similar, where they feel like they don't have the language exactly how to express the things that they're struggling with. And I think it's very much bound up in certain expectations. I can only speak from my experience as a woman. I can't really speak for the experience of men and the expectations of that, you know, the culture puts on them and their gender. But for from the woman's standpoint, I feel there's an expectation in some ways of being the strength, the emotional core and the heart of the family, but also not being too emotional, and also being very self-giving, you know, putting on a good face, you know, everything's great, you look flawless, working hard, but also, you know, being there to support the rest of the family emotionally. But then that leaves a lot of people with a struggle. They are not supported, right? They're shouldering all the grief and all the shared trauma of, you know, a continent that's been marked by colonial violence and, you know, dictatorship and war for so long, that it affects people. It affects people's mental health, and it's not really spoken about, and nobody has the avenue to speak about. And like statistics wise, this is just speaking for the States, but it's something like, you know, Latin Americans are the least likely to seek help for mental illness. And then on the flip side of the show around womanhood, I wanted to work with some mediums that are traditionally associated with like domesticity and women, so knitting and sewing and weaving, because I found during like going back to Colombia, that is a really deep and wonderful tradition. And sort of people use it, I've seen it used as sort of an archive, like memories, or people, you know, keep motifs that have been passed down from family to family. They tell their stories with textiles, and they express their creativities with textiles. And, you know, in some regions as well, pottery is very much a feminine art. And so those are the two, I mean, they're the two materials I'm most familiar with. And so the two that I ended up using, just being really inspired by folk art and, you know, the space that I grew up in, which was always full of art from Colombia, from Mexico, because my grandma also would like travel a lot to places like Mexico City and Oaxaca and collect folk art. And also just learning, you know, the process of learning, being really inspired by these textile works and learning from women there how to spin and how to weave and how to, you know, string a loom and do all of that. And yeah, just playing with the material. It's been a really interesting sort of process, because it's not an easy topic to talk about, and especially I've been really lucky. The response to it has been overwhelmingly positive, but one of the things that I was nervous about is that people in Victoria wouldn't necessarily know that this is a thing, and they wouldn't really get the, you know, cultural context. But so far, people have responded really well to it, which makes me, you know, tremendously happy and thankful. And it's something that I hope to expand on in the future, thematically, and just to continue working on these pieces and continue working with that theme of the link between culture, emotion, womanhood, identity in my art. Okay, so this piece is called Guha, hilo carapacho, which means needle thread and carapace, like the carapace of a beetle. And basically, it's a worn sculpture. You wear it on your back with a spike sticking outwards, much like you would a porcupine. And it started sort of with the quilt base, and I wanted to do something that involved quilting but subverted it as well. Speaking about, again, the themes of mental illness, anyone who has struggled with it can describe that it's a very uncomfortable thing to live with. It's very difficult. Sometimes it'll feel like a weight sitting on your shoulders, especially things like depression, where it just feels like it's bowing you and pushing you forward and just sort of, it's always there. And wearing this piece is really uncomfortable. It's really awkward. It's heavy. And you're always kind of worried you're going to poke yourself. And moving around with it sort of mimics how one would feel in, of course, a very dramatized fashion, maneuvering around the world and your day-to-day life with mental illness, untreated mental illness especially. On the flip side of that, it's also sort of a protective thing, thinking about the theme of animals like porcupines and things, where the spikes are to push people away, to keep things out, to sort of create an armor around yourself that is also a comfort. So there's this duality to this piece that I'm actually, I was sort of trying to convey with the softness of the quilt and the fabric material, but also the spikes, the metal that holds it into place. And just the general ungainliness of the piece, sort of creating a dichotomy between hiding in yourself, but also not being good in that place where you're hiding. Okay, this piece is called Relicario de las Gotitas, so reliquary of the little droplets. And it's a ceramic piece. It's slab-built, hand-built. Mostly based off of and inspired by pieces that I saw at my grandmother's house in her folk art collection, something I've been tremendously inspired by, as well as things from my own memories as a child, also visits to Colombia, motifs like the calla lilies and the little roadside shrines that you see everywhere are just things that really stick strongly in my mind thematically from Colombia. And of course, the little tanager birds as well that you see on the north coast that people have generally as pets. What this depicts is the legend of La Llorona, which is like kind of a boogeyman in many cultures in Latin America, where it's a woman who caught the eye of a rich man, and eventually, he changed after they married, and she bore him children, and he got bored of her, and so she drowned her kids in a rage, and then realizing what she had done, ran screaming through the streets, and some people say she flung herself into the water after them, and some say she wasted away. It really depends on who's telling the story. But of course, as a child, that's super terrifying, and her ghost is used as a, go to bed, be good, go to bed, or La Llorona is gonna come get you, te sale La Llorona. Thankfully, my mom didn't do that, but definitely I heard that story from friends. It really freaked me out. But at the same time, I kind of feel that symbol as empowering. La Llorona as a woman who is taking revenge on abuses that were done to her. And this definitely speaks to domestic abuse and violence against women, which is a real problem, worldwide, of course. But just based on experiences that I know, people I've spoken to who have experienced domestic violence, who have experienced intimate partner violence and abuse, whether it's physical, emotional, or verbal. And their experience and how many of them come out as very much, I wouldn't say the word damaged, but like changed, hardened in some way, but also far more powerful. They come and they find this power in this pain, and they channel that however they may, sometimes healthfully, sometimes unhealthfully. And just seeing that and living my own experiences too, I feel like that was an important thing to speak about in this piece. How it's sort of this, La Llorona is a very scary figure, but also an extremely powerful figure. And that feeling of just crying and crying and crying and crying, that I'm sure, you know, victims of abuse and survivors of abuse will tell you of their experience is sort of, you know, that seemed to really draw through line through the myth as well. Yeah. So this is the last piece in the exhibition. It's actually a collaborative piece that I'm inviting people to come over the course of the show and add to, because in my experience, the making of textiles is often very much a social activity. You see women, you know, with the backstrap looms tied around a central pole, and they're weaving and they're chatting, or people just wandering around talking to people, spinning with a drop spindle, or, you know, mothers teaching their kids how to embroider, and that making of textiles as a social activity and a passing down of generational knowledge really resonated with me. And so I wanted to invite people to come and embroider on this piece of linen here, just anything they want. There are no rules, and to create this sort of collaborative piece, and if possible, if there are more than one person within the gallery at the time, to chat while they do it, and to talk about their own stories and to stitch their own story onto the fabric. And eventually, hopefully, this whole thing will be filled and be able to take it around and display it in other locations as well.